the Black Mountain Poets. The Black Mountain Poets were the poets who worked in the 1940s and 50s in the United States of America. It emerged, Black Mountain poetry emerged during the 1940s and the 50s, and all the writers like Olson were part. They had some kind of role in the Black Mountain College in North Carolina. So some were professors there, some were researchers, some were students. So all these poets, it's not necessarily they did not come together to write, but they were linked by this college. So their writings show some common features, and they were clubbed as a Black Mountain Poets. They came out with this work called they published a lot in the magazines like Black Mountain Review, Origin, and the essay Projective Verse is considered the central text in Black Mountain poetry. It was prepared by Olson, and it is a kind of manifesto of Black Mountain poetry. Now, what is Black Mountain poetry? It is basically experimental verse. Whatever kind of literature arose during the postmodern period was experimental. It experimented with new forms, new meters, new rhymes, new techniques. Now, Black Mountain poetry was experimental poetry, and they emphasized on projective verse, where there's an open field and the idea projects from the poem. Okay, so whatever the writer is trying to convey, it stands highlighted in the text. It stands foregrounded in the text. Now, so the Black Mountain poets, they rejected closed forms. They accepted open forms. They did not prescribe to set notions of rhymes or use of metaphors or similes. They accepted open forms of writing, and they were open to new modes of writing. And they were totally against the use of grand diction and subject matter. They did not write about metaphysical things or philosophy. They prefer to write about things that concern the common person, the common man or woman, especially people who were marginalized. So Black Mountain poetry did not subscribe to any of the set notions about poetry. And the language used was very plain. They did not use a lot of embellishments, and they depended more on metonymy, where a part represents a whole rather than metaphor and simile. So there was very little use of figures of speech in Black Mountain poetry because they wanted to keep it quite simple. And as a corollary to that, we can argue that they stated their ideas directly. They did not take roundabout ways of expressing an idea. If there was an idea, they expressed it as it was. And as I said, it was an open form approach. They were open to new ideas, and they were open to blank words. There was no set pattern in which you had to write. And rather than the stanza, the page assumed importance. So generally in poetry, we talk about stanza 1, stanza 2. But in the case of Black Mountain poets, the emphasis was not on the stanza as such, but on the page. So the divisions were mostly, page breaks. The poetry of the Black Mountain poets was objective. It was concrete. There were no abstract ideas embedded in them. They were against using poetry as a means of conveying abstract ideas. They wanted to use it as a means of conveying certain direct things, of simple notions that the common man or woman could associate with. Now, another central feature of Black Mountain poetry was the emphasis given to the breath, like the natural breath. So they say that a line should be uttered in one breath. A line should not be too long because it has to be completed in one breath. You should be able to read it in one breath. This idea of the rhythm of natural breathing was significant to the Black Mountain poets. Now, as I said, they rejected a predetermined set of rules. They wanted to experiment, and they were open to new kinds of verse. Now, another central idea in Black Mountain poetry is that the poet received his energy from a source, not a divine source, but from some source. And the poet's energy is transferred to the reader through the poem. So first, this is something like Plato said. Plato talked about some magnets, first there's a lodestone, okay, which is the muse. The poet gets inspiration from the muse, the rhapsode or the singer gets inspiration from the poet, and the audience gets inspiration from the rhapsode. So it is a kind of a magnet. The same thing applies here. The poet receives his energy and inspiration from a source. Then he writes the poem, and through the poem, the energy is transferred to the audience or the reader. Now, I mentioned this essay Projective Words before. It was published in a journal called Poetry New York in 1950, and it is considered the manifesto of Black Mountain poetry. So it says that the source of the poet's energy or the main theme should be expressed, should be projected in a very objective fashion. It should stand out from the rest of the text. And it also argued, the essay also argued against sets of rules. It was open. It wanted to accept new things. It wanted experimental verse. The idea of energy transfer from poet to reader also arises in this essay, Projective Verse. And Robert Creeley, who was one of the practitioners of Black Mountain poetry, he says that form is an extension of the content. Form, it cannot exist independently of the content. So the form is kind of, it depicts the content. The content extends into the form. And another argument raised in this was that in a good poem, one perception must immediately lead to a further perception. That is, ideas should move in quick succession. You should not talk about an idea for too long and then after two stanzas move on to the next idea. No, one image should follow the other. One idea should follow the other in a movement of quick succession. Now, this is the same thing. So they also emphasized on breadth, and because they emphasized on breadth, which could project the force of language, they also emphasized on syllable. Syllable is the articulation of the breath. The syllable is a basic unit of any composition, and one syllable can be uttered in one breath. Okay, so the syllable assumed prominence in Black Mountain poetry. And the poets also said that a poem is constituted by the syllable and the line together. So till then, poets emphasized on the line and the stanza. Now you see the Black Mountain poets emphasizing on the line and the syllable. Syllable never received any kind of prominence before, but the Black Mountain poets emphasized on the use of the syllable, on how a syllable becomes prominent, very important in conveying a certain message. Now, the objects that have been presented, whether it is a book or nature or a person, it should be it should be shown as they occur. It's not in terms of interpretation. The poet cannot interpret it according to pre-given sets of rules. Instead, he should write about it in a way, in the way he sees it, he or she sees it, okay, as he or she sees it. He should not take external interpretations into account while writing poetry, because external interpretations belong to another person or belong to another set of thought. The poet should have it in himself to present things in a direct fashion in his or her own way. Now, it also talked about the movement, the possibility of a movement called objectism, where you get rid of the interference of the individual poet. Okay, the individual poet is himself an object who sometimes intervenes in the poem. So the Black Mountain poets tried to erase the presence of this object, that is the human being. They talked about the possibility of the poem existing in itself without the writer or the poet intervening. Now, there were a number of poets who belonged to the school. Charles Olson, his work, Projective Verse, his work Projective Verse, written in 1950, is considered the most significant. Then we have Robert Creeley, whom we already mentioned, and we have Robert Duncan, Dennis Levertov, Paul Blackburn, Paul Carroll, William Brown, Larry Ainer, Edward Don, Jonathan Williams, and so on. Okay, we also have Charles Potts, who is a contemporary Black Mountain poet. Okay, although it existed in the 1950s and 60s, we see traces of this kind of verse in Charles Potts' poetry as well. Now, take a minute to look at this poem "For Love" by Robert Creeley. if you look at it, if you try to read it on your own, you will see that each line can be read in one breath. There are no long lines. There are no lines that require you to pause and then enunciate it. You just read it in one line. The lines are very short. Okay, so you can take a minute to just go through the poem. If you can try to say it aloud, it will be good.